What would you do if a simple plumbing repair revealed the darkest secret your community had ever kept buried? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this. It's a regular Tuesday morning in March 2024, and Marcus Rivera, a local plumber in Meadow Falls, Nevada, receives what seems like the most ordinary call of his career. A backed-up toilet at an old farm property. Nothing he hadn't handled 1,000 times before. Has this ever happened to you? You go to work expecting just another routine day, only to have your entire world turned upside down in an instant? Marcus arrives at the Rodriguez farm, a weathered property that had seen better days, surrounded by the kind of endless desert landscape that keeps secrets well. The elderly homeowner explains the problem. Water backing up, strange sounds in the pipes, the usual complaints that come with aging plumbing systems. But as Marcus begins his work, removing the cap from the corroded water system beneath the southeastern corner of the old barn, he expects to find the typical culprits. Debris, maybe a dead animal, certainly nothing that would haunt his dreams for years to come. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because what Marcus found that day wasn't just backed-up sludge or tangled roots. Wedged between rusted pipework and sun-bleached fabric, he discovered something that would reopen the coldest case in the county's history: a human jawbone, still attached to a child's skull. Within hours, what had been a simple repair job transformed into the largest criminal investigation Meadow Falls had ever seen. But here's where this story becomes truly chilling. The water system Marcus was working on hadn't been in use since the 1980s, and as investigators would soon discover, the last time anyone in town had seen certain children was during the summer of 1985. Stay with me until the end, because the connection between these discoveries runs deeper than anyone could have imagined. 39 years earlier, 6 young cousins, the Winchester children, ages 6 through 13, had vanished without a trace from this very property. It was July 1985. One of those perfect summer days when children's laughter echoes across open fields, and the biggest worry should be getting them home before sunset. The Winchester kids had been playing behind the barn, their voices carrying on the desert wind, when suddenly the laughter stopped. By evening, all 6 were gone, leaving behind only a torn blue jacket and questions that would torment their family for nearly 4 decades. The initial search efforts were massive. Hundreds of volunteers, bloodhounds, helicopters, and federal agents scoured every inch of the surrounding desert. Television crews arrived, turning the small Nevada town into a media circus as the nation watched and waited for answers that never came. But despite the extensive manhunt, no trace of the children was ever found, until Marcus Rivera's wrench loosened that corroded cap in 2024. What investigators are now uncovering suggests that the Winchester children's disappearance was just the beginning of something far more sinister. The bones Marcus discovered tell a story that spans decades, involves multiple families, and reveals a network of secrets that this quiet community had somehow managed to keep buried beneath the desert. Sand. The question that haunts everyone involved is simple yet terrifying. If 6 children could vanish without a trace from a small town where everyone knows everyone, what else has been hidden all these years? And, more importantly, how many more secrets lie waiting beneath the surface, just one routine repair job away from being exposed? The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would forever change Detective Sarah Chen's perspective on what small-town secrets could truly hide. Sarah had built her reputation on solving cold cases, the kind of investigations that require you to think differently, to see patterns where others see coincidence. But nothing in her 20-year career had prepared her for the transformation this case would demand of her entire worldview. When the forensic analysis confirmed that the bones Marcus had discovered belonged to children who had died in the 1980s, Sarah realized she wasn't just reopening a missing persons case. She was stepping into something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about human nature and the hidden truths that communities can bury. The impact of this revelation rippled through the small Nevada town like an earthquake, shaking foundations that had seemed solid for nearly 4 decades. But here's what made this discovery even more disturbing. The underground cistern where the remains were found had been sealed since 1976, nearly a decade before the Winchester children disappeared. Think about the mindset required for that level of planning. Someone had chosen this location deliberately, knowing it would remain undisturbed, knowing that the contaminated water would keep people away. Local residents remembered the warnings passed down through generations. Stay away from the old well system, the water had turned bad, it was dangerous. Yet no one suspected that these warnings were hiding something far more sinister than contaminated groundwater. Sarah's investigation revealed that the decision to seal the cistern had been made by Roberto Rodriguez, the children's grandfather, citing bacterial contamination as the reason. But as she dug deeper into the paperwork, inconsistencies began to emerge. The documentation was questionable, signed by individuals who weren't licensed inspectors, processed through channels that bypassed normal safety protocols. This wasn't just about bad water. This was about creating the perfect hiding place. If you're someone who appreciates deep dives into cases like this rather than surface-level coverage, subscribing to this channel means you'll never miss the kind of investigative storytelling that actually respects your intelligence. We don't just tell you what happened. We explore why it matters and what it reveals about the world we live in. The journey of uncovering these hidden truths led Sarah to question everything about the community she thought she understood. Behind the scenes of this quiet desert town, something had been operating for decades, something that required the kind of long-term planning and community silence that seems impossible in our connected world. Yet here was the evidence, buried beneath tons of concrete and steel, waiting for a simple plumbing repair to bring it back to light. What strikes me most about this case is how it demonstrates the power of collective silence. We often think about secrets as individual choices, personal decisions to hide something shameful or dangerous, but this situation required an entire community to look the other way, to accept explanations that didn't quite add up, to avoid asking the questions that might have saved lives. The revelations that emerged would force everyone in Meadow Falls to confront uncomfortable truths about what they had chosen not to see. The transformation in Sarah's approach to the investigation became clear when she realized this wasn't just about solving a decades-old disappearance. The methodical sealing of the cistern, the timing of the children's disappearance, the community's collective amnesia, these weren't separate incidents but pieces of a larger puzzle that would challenge her understanding of how far people will go to protect their darkest secrets. The transformation of Meadow Falls from a quiet desert community into the center of a national mystery began within hours of the Winchester children's disappearance in July 1985. What started as a family's worst nightmare quickly evolved into something that would test the very fabric of how communities respond to crisis and the decisions they make when faced with the unthinkable. Sheriff's deputies arrived first, but within days, the search effort had grown into something unprecedented for a town of barely 3,000 residents. Hundreds of volunteers descended on the Rodriguez property, their voices echoing across the same fields where children's laughter had been heard just days before. Bloodhounds worked tirelessly, following scent trails that seemed to vanish into thin air. Helicopters circled overhead, their rhythmic beating becoming the soundtrack of a community's desperate hope and growing despair. Behind the scenes of this massive operation, something fascinating was happening. The search revealed the true character of people when faced with extraordinary circumstances. Neighbors who barely spoke became coordinators of rescue efforts. Strangers drove hundreds of miles to join the search. Yet, despite this incredible mobilization of human resources, despite combing every inch of the desert landscape for weeks, they found nothing. Nothing except that single torn blue jacket, a piece of evidence so small yet so significant that it would haunt investigators for decades. The media attention that followed created its own unique impact on the investigation and the community's mindset. Television crews transformed the Rodriguez family's private tragedy into a public spectacle, setting up camp outside their home, turning their grief into entertainment for millions of viewers. This wasn't just about finding missing children anymore. It had become a story that captured America's imagination and fears about child safety in rural communities. The revelations about how media coverage can both help and hinder investigations became painfully apparent. While national attention brought resources and volunteers, it also brought chaos. Theories spread like wildfire through news reports and viewer call-ins. Every suspicious character within a 100-mile radius became a potential suspect in the court of public opinion. The Rodriguez family found themselves scrutinized not just by law enforcement, but by an entire nation looking for answers, explanations, someone to blame for the unthinkable. What strikes me about this period is how the journey from private tragedy to public obsession changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. The pressure to find answers quickly led to hasty conclusions, overlooked evidence, and a focus on external threats rather than examining what might be hiding much closer to home. The mindset of the investigators became influenced by the media narrative, creating blind spots that would persist for nearly 4 decades. The hidden truth about this massive search effort is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire case. While hundreds of people were searching the desert, walking over sand dunes and rocky outcroppings, the children they were looking for were likely already buried beneath their feet, sealed in a concrete tomb that no search dog could detect, no helicopter could spot from above. The very property they were searching harbored the secret that would remain hidden until Marcus Rivera's wrench exposed it 39 years later. This realization forces us to confront an uncomfortable question about the nature of deception and community trust. How do you hide 6 children in plain sight? How do you maintain the facade of a grieving family while knowing exactly where those children are? The transformation required to live with such knowledge, to participate in search efforts while knowing they're futile, reveals a level of psychological complexity that challenges our understanding of human behavior. The transformation from urgent investigation to forgotten case study reveals one of the most heartbreaking realities about missing persons cases. Despite the massive federal involvement, the helicopters, the bloodhounds, and the hundreds of volunteers, the Winchester children's disappearance gradually faded from national consciousness like so many unsolved mysteries before it. By 1987, just 2 years after that devastating July day, the FBI began scaling back operations, and the reward money that had once reached 6 figures slowly dried up, leaving the Rodriguez family with nothing but questions and an emptiness that would echo through their home for decades. This journey from hope to resignation demonstrates how our society's attention span for tragedy operates. The initial surge of support and resources gives way to the harsh reality that some mysteries resist even our most determined efforts to solve them. The mindset shift required for families to accept this new reality is profound. Moving from active searching to passive waiting, from believing answers are just around the corner to wondering if they'll ever come at all. But Rosa Rodriguez refused to accept that transformation. The elderly matriarch of the family made a decision that would define the next 4 decades of her life. While the rest of the world moved on, while investigators filed the case away in dusty archives, Rosa remained on the farm, maintaining a vigil that speaks to the power of maternal love and the refusal to surrender hope even when logic suggests you should. If this investigation opened your eyes to how these networks actually operate and made you think differently about rural crime patterns, that like button is your way of telling me this kind of in-depth analysis is worth the time it takes to research and present properly. The impact of Rosa's daily ritual reveals something profound about the human spirit. Every morning, for nearly 40 years, she would set 6 extra places at her dinner table, 1 for each missing grandchild. Think about the mindset required to maintain such a routine. Day after day, month after month, year after year, placing plates and silverware for children who never came home, never knowing if this would be the day they walked through that door. Behind the scenes of this seemingly simple ritual lay a complexity that few could understand. Was this the behavior of a grandmother clinging to hope? Or was there something deeper at work? The hidden truth about Rosa's vigil would only become clear after her death in 2023 at age 89, when investigators began examining not just what she did, but what she might have known all along. The revelations about Rosa's role in the family's story challenge our assumptions about grief and guilt. Her unwavering commitment to maintaining those place settings could be interpreted as the desperate hope of a loving grandmother, but it could also represent something far more complex, a form of penance, a daily reminder of secrets too terrible to confess but too heavy to forget. What strikes me most about Rosa's 40-year vigil is how it demonstrates the different ways people carry their burdens. While some might have fled the property, where such tragedy occurred, Rosa chose to stay, to face those empty chairs every single day. The transformation this required, the strength to maintain such a routine while carrying whatever knowledge she possessed, speaks to the incredible capacity humans have for enduring psychological pain. The journey of understanding Rosa's true motivations would only begin after her death, when Detective Sarah Chen gained access to the family home and discovered that the grandmother's devotion to her missing grandchildren was just one layer of a much deeper, more disturbing truth about what had really happened on that July day in 1985. The excavation that followed Marcus Rivera's discovery transformed Detective Sarah Chen's understanding of what they were really dealing with. As forensic teams carefully removed layers of sediment and debris from the cistern, what emerged wasn't just the remains of 6 children from 1985, but evidence of something far more systematic and terrifying. The forensic analysis revealed multiple sets of remains, some significantly older than the Winchester disappearance, suggesting that this underground tomb had been used as a burial site for decades. This revelation forced a complete shift in mindset for everyone involved in the investigation. What they had initially believed was a tragic but isolated incident was actually part of a pattern that stretched back through multiple generations. The impact of this discovery rippled through the forensic community, because the preservation conditions in the sealed cistern had maintained evidence that would normally have been lost to time and desert conditions. Behind the scenes of this painstaking excavation, a more disturbing picture began to emerge. The positioning of the remains wasn't random. There was an intentional arrangement, a methodology that suggested ritualistic behavior rather than simple disposal. The hidden truth about the Rodriguez property was becoming clear. This wasn't just where one family's tragedy had occurred, but where systematic violence had been perpetrated over the course of decades. Detective Chen's journey into the historical records revealed patterns that had been invisible to previous investigators. Her research uncovered similar disappearances dating back to the 1960s, all involving children, all occurring within a 6-mile radius of the Rodriguez property. The transformation from viewing these as separate, unrelated incidents to recognizing them as connected events required a fundamental shift in how law enforcement approached cold cases in rural communities. The revelations about this 25-year span of disappearances challenged everything investigators thought they knew about how predators operate. We often think of serial crimes as the work of individuals acting alone, but the evidence emerging from the cistern suggested something far more complex, a network of complicity that involved multiple people over multiple generations. The decisions required to maintain such a system, to keep such secrets within a small community, reveal a level of coordination that seems almost impossible to achieve. What strikes me most about these historical patterns is how they demonstrate the power of isolation and community silence. Each individual disappearance might have seemed like a random tragedy, a child who wandered off or was taken by a stranger passing through town. But when viewed together, when mapped across time and geography, they revealed a systematic approach that had operated undetected for a quarter of a century. The impact of these discoveries extended far beyond the immediate investigation. Families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their children suddenly had answers, but those answers raised even more disturbing questions about how many people in their community had known the truth and chosen to remain silent. The transformation required for survivors to process this information was profound, moving from the pain of not knowing to the horror of understanding exactly what had happened to their loved ones. The investigation into the county records surrounding the cistern's ceiling revealed a level of premeditation that transformed the entire understanding of how this systematic horror had been concealed. When Detective Sarah Chen examined the 1976 permit documentation for sealing the underground water tank, she discovered irregularities that painted a disturbing picture of Roberto Rodriguez's mindset and his ability to manipulate official processes to serve his darkest purposes. The fact that you've stayed through this entire complex investigation tells me you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel was created for. Hit that subscribe button because you deserve content that treats these stories with the depth and respect they require, not just quick sensational summaries that miss the real significance. The paperwork showed that Roberto had orchestrated the sealing with questionable documentation, using co-signers who weren't licensed inspectors and bypassing standard safety protocols that should have required official oversight. This wasn't the panicked decision of someone trying to hide evidence after a crime. This was the calculated planning of someone who understood exactly what he intended to use that space for. The transformation from viewing Roberto as a grieving grandfather to recognizing him as the architect of a multi-generational horror required investigators to completely reimagine the family dynamics they thought they understood. Behind the scenes of this bureaucratic deception lay a man who had learned to work within systems while subverting them for his own purposes. The impact of Roberto's ability to navigate official channels while committing horrific crimes demonstrates how predators often hide in plain sight, using their understanding of community trust and institutional processes to create the perfect cover for their activities. The journey toward understanding Roberto's true nature took a dramatic turn when investigators discovered his hidden journal during the search of Rosa's personal belongings after her death. The revelations contained in his own handwriting provided the first concrete evidence of his direct involvement in the disappearances. These weren't the confused ramblings of someone struggling with mental illness. They were the methodical entries of someone who believed deeply in what he was doing. Roberto's journal entries spoke of buried secrets and divine judgment, revealing a mindset that had transformed ordinary family relationships into something twisted and ritualistic. His writing suggested that he viewed the murders not as crimes, but as necessary acts, divinely inspired decisions that served some greater purpose that only he could understand. The hidden truth about Roberto's psychological state emerged through these entries. He had created an entire belief system that justified his actions and allowed him to maintain his public persona while committing unthinkable acts. What strikes me most about these journal discoveries is how they reveal the power of rationalization in the human mind. Roberto had developed an elaborate internal narrative that allowed him to see himself not as a monster, but as someone fulfilling a sacred duty. The transformation required to maintain such a worldview while living among the families of his victims demonstrates the incredible capacity humans have for self-deception when it serves their deepest desires. The impact of these revelations extended beyond just solving the mystery of the Winchester children's disappearance. Roberto's writing suggested that his activities weren't isolated incidents but part of a larger pattern of behavior that had religious or ritualistic significance to him. The decisions he had made, the careful planning evident in both the permit fraud and the journal entries, pointed towards something far more organized and systematic than random acts of violence. The discovery of the buried toolbox marked a transformation in how investigators understood the systematic nature of what had been happening on the Rodriguez property. When archaeologists carefully unearthed the corroded metal container from beneath layers of settled earth, they expected to find tools or farm equipment. Instead, what emerged was evidence of something far more disturbing, a collection that revealed the true mindset behind these crimes and the deliberate documentation of unspeakable acts. Inside this weathered cache, investigators found photographs that had been deliberately defaced, images of children with their eyes scratched out in a pattern that suggested ritualistic significance rather than random vandalism. The impact of seeing these photos was profound because they weren't just documentation, they were trophies, carefully preserved evidence of a systematic approach to selecting and processing victims. Roberto's journal entries had hinted at religious justification, but these physical artifacts revealed the ceremonial practices that accompanied his actions. The notebooks found alongside the photographs detailed what could only be described as ceremonial practices, complete with symbols, dates, and procedures that transformed murder into ritual. The hidden truth about Roberto's activities became clear. This wasn't the work of someone acting on impulse or rage, but the methodical behavior of someone who had developed an entire belief system around his crimes. The transformation required to move from ordinary family patriarch to someone capable of such systematic documentation reveals the frightening capacity humans have for creating meaning around their darkest impulses. Behind the scenes of this discovery, investigators realized they were dealing with something that extended far beyond one disturbed individual. The symbols found in Roberto's notebooks matched markings that had been discovered at crime scenes in Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, cases that had been investigated separately without anyone recognizing the connections. The revelations about this multi-state network forced law enforcement agencies to completely reimagine how they approached cold cases involving missing children in rural communities. The journey toward understanding the true scope of this network began when Detective Sarah Chen contacted her counterparts in neighboring states and discovered that similar symbols, similar documentation methods, and similar victim profiles had appeared in unsolved cases across a vast geographic area. The impact of these connections was staggering, because it suggested that Roberto hadn't been working alone, but as part of a multi-generational organization that had been operating across state lines for decades. What strikes me most about this network is how it demonstrates the power of shared belief systems to enable and perpetuate horrific behavior. The decisions these individuals made weren't random acts of violence, but coordinated activities that served what they believed was a higher purpose. The transformation from viewing these as isolated incidents to recognizing them as part of an organized system required investigators to confront the reality that such networks could exist and operate undetected in modern America. The mindset required to maintain such an organization across multiple generations speaks to the incredible human capacity for indoctrination and the ways in which extreme beliefs can be passed down through families and communities. The hidden truth about these connections revealed that the Rodriguez property wasn't just a burial ground, but a node in a much larger network of similar sites, each serving the ritualistic needs of believers who saw themselves as keepers of ancient practices. The recovered documents from Roberto's cache introduced terminology that transformed the entire investigation from a criminal case into something that challenged investigators' understanding of how organized belief systems can justify the most horrific acts imaginable. References to keepers and circles appeared throughout the notebooks, revealing a structured hierarchy and systematic approach that treated child murder not as crime but as religious obligation. The mindset required to develop such doctrine demonstrates how human beings can create elaborate justifications for their darkest impulses when those justifications are wrapped in the language of spirituality and cosmic responsibility. The impact of discovering this keeper's code was profound because it revealed that Roberto and his network didn't see themselves as criminals but as guardians of some ancient practice necessary to maintain cosmic balance. Their writings spoke of maintaining harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds, of preventing greater catastrophes through their ritualistic sacrifices. The transformation from viewing these as random acts of violence to understanding them as coordinated religious practices required investigators to confront the reality that such belief systems could develop and perpetuate themselves across generations. Behind the scenes of this theological horror lay a sophisticated system of indoctrination that passed these beliefs from one generation to the next. The hidden truth about how such networks maintain themselves became clear through the documentation. New members weren't recruited randomly but were born into families where these practices were normalized, where children grew up believing that participating in ritual murder was not only acceptable but necessary for the greater good. The journey toward understanding the full scope of this system took an even more disturbing turn when investigators discovered VHS tapes hidden in various locations connected to the network. These recordings provided undeniable evidence that the victims had been held captive for extended periods before their deaths, subjected to ritualistic treatment that prepared them for what the keepers believed was their sacred purpose. The revelations contained on these tapes confirmed that this wasn't about quick disposal of victims, but about elaborate ceremonial processes that could last days or weeks. Hitting, like on this video, isn't just about the algorithm. It's about supporting the kind of thorough investigative content that takes weeks to research and present, because stories this complex deserve more than quick takes and surface-level coverage. What strikes me most about this video evidence is how it demonstrates the systematic nature of the abuse these children endured. The recordings weren't created for documentation purposes alone, but served as training materials for new keepers, showing them the proper procedures for preparing victims according to their twisted doctrine. The decisions these individuals made to record such horror reveals a level of organization and long-term planning that challenges our assumptions about how such networks operate. The impact of viewing this evidence was devastating for investigators because it proved that the children found in the cistern had suffered far more than anyone had imagined. The transformation from hoping these were quick deaths to understanding the prolonged trauma these victims had endured required a complete shift in how the investigation team processed their own emotional responses to the case. The mindset required to inflict such systematic torture while believing it serves a holy purpose reveals the terrifying power of religious extremism to override basic human empathy. The hidden truth about these recordings extended beyond their content to their distribution. Evidence suggested that copies had been shared among different branches of the network, serving both as instruction manuals for new keepers and as proof of each group's commitment to the shared doctrine. This exchange of materials created connections between distant cells and ensured that the practices remained consistent across different geographic locations. The transformation from a local investigation to a federal task force operation began when Special Agent Patricia Morales received a call that would change her career forever. The FBI had been monitoring similar evidence surfacing in jurisdictions across Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. But it wasn't until Detective Sarah Chen's discoveries in Nevada that the true scope of this network became undeniable. The impact of realizing they were dealing with a multi-generational organization spanning decades and involving multiple families required a complete shift in how law enforcement approached what they had initially believed were isolated incidents. Patricia's journey into this investigation revealed something that challenged every assumption about how criminal networks operate in modern America. The hidden truth about this organization was that it functioned more like a sophisticated criminal enterprise than the chaotic cult activities that investigators initially expected. Behind the scenes of their religious justifications lay a methodical system of communication and coordination that allowed different branches to maintain contact across vast distances while sharing materials and coordinating their activities. The revelations about their distribution network were perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire investigation. These weren't isolated groups of extremists acting independently. They were coordinated cells that operated with the efficiency of a corporate structure. The decisions these individuals made to share recordings, exchange victims, and maintain consistent practices across state lines demonstrated a level of organization that had allowed them to operate undetected for generations. What strikes me most about this distribution system is how it reveals the power of shared ideology to create lasting bonds between people who might never meet face to face. The mindset required to participate in such a network, to trust other cells with incriminating evidence while maintaining operational security, speaks to the incredible commitment these individuals had to their twisted beliefs. The transformation from viewing this as local family dysfunction to recognizing it as a sophisticated criminal enterprise required investigators to completely reimagine how such organizations could develop and sustain themselves. The impact of understanding this network structure extended far beyond just solving historical cases. Patricia's team realized they were dealing with an organization that had perfected the art of compartmentalization, where individual cells could operate independently while still serving the larger mission. The journey toward mapping these connections revealed that the keepers had developed communication methods that allowed them to share information without creating obvious paper trails or digital footprints that modern law enforcement typically relies on to track criminal organizations. Behind the scenes of this investigation, a terrifying picture emerged of how the network had evolved over time. Early generations had relied on personal relationships and family connections to maintain their activities, but later iterations had developed more sophisticated methods of recruitment and coordination. The hidden truth about their operational security was that they had learned from the mistakes of other criminal organizations, adapting their practices to avoid the detection methods that had brought down more conventional crime syndicates. The revelations about their material sharing practices confirmed that this wasn't just about local power or control, but about maintaining a larger mission that transcended individual desires for violence. The recordings weren't just trophies or training materials, they were proof of each cell's commitment to the shared doctrine, evidence that could be used to ensure loyalty and prevent members from abandoning the network. The journey toward understanding how such a network could operate for decades without detection led Patricia's team to locate surviving family members scattered across the country, individuals who had spent their entire lives carrying secrets too terrible to speak aloud. The transformation these interviews revealed was perhaps the most psychologically complex aspect of the entire investigation. The discovery of how ordinary people could maintain silence about extraordinary evil through a combination of fear, indoctrination, and complicity that enabled crimes to continue for generations. Behind the scenes of these interrogations, a pattern emerged that challenged investigators' understanding of family dynamics and loyalty. The impact of decades-long silence had created a psychological prison for these relatives who had lived with the knowledge of what their family members had done while maintaining public facades of normalcy. The revelations about their mindset showed how fear and religious manipulation could transform potential witnesses into willing participants in a conspiracy of silence that protected the network's activities. What strikes me most about these interviews is how they demonstrated the power of gradual indoctrination to normalize the unthinkable. Family members described a slow progression from witnessing minor ritualistic behaviors to becoming complicit in major crimes, each step justified by the belief that questioning the family's sacred mission would result in supernatural punishment. The decisions these individuals made to remain silent weren't just about self-preservation, but reflected a deep-seated belief system that had been carefully cultivated over years of psychological manipulation. The hidden truth about this family network became fully clear when investigators located Miguel Rodriguez, Roberto's son, living under an assumed name in Florida. The transformation of this middle-aged man from suspected victim to confessed perpetrator revealed the intergenerational nature of the organization and how beliefs could be passed down through bloodlines like genetic inheritance. Miguel's willingness to admit his participation in continuing the family's sacred work demonstrated the powerful grip these doctrines maintained even decades after Roberto's death. Miguel's confession provided investigators with their first direct insight into the supernatural beliefs that motivated these crimes. His revelations about the cult's core mission challenged every assumption about their motivations. They genuinely believed they were preventing a catastrophic supernatural event that would destroy humanity if their ritualistic obligations weren't fulfilled. The impact of understanding this mindset was profound, because it explained how ordinary people could participate in systematic murder while maintaining their sense of moral righteousness. The journey into Miguel's psychological state revealed something terrifying about human nature and the power of absolute belief. He described his participation not with shame or regret, but with the quiet pride of someone who believed he had sacrificed his own comfort for the greater good of humanity. The transformation required to maintain such beliefs while living in modern society, surrounded by people who would be horrified by his actions, speaks to the incredible human capacity for compartmentalization and self-justification. Behind the scenes of Miguel's confession, investigators realized they were dealing with someone who had never questioned the fundamental premises of his upbringing. The hidden truth about his continued activities revealed that the network hadn't ended with Roberto's generation, but had evolved and adapted, with new members taking on the responsibility of maintaining what they saw as humanity's protection against supernatural forces. The transformation from viewing this network as a criminal organization to understanding it as a theological movement required investigators to confront beliefs so extreme they challenged the boundaries of human psychology. Miguel's revelations about their core doctrine exposed the hidden truth that had motivated 3 generations of systematic murder. These individuals genuinely believed they were keepers tasked with maintaining cosmic order through ritualistic child sacrifice. The impact of understanding this mindset was profound, because it revealed how religious extremism could evolve into something so divorced from conventional morality that murder became a sacred duty. Behind the scenes of their twisted theology lay a sophisticated belief system that taught members they were humanity's last line of defense against supernatural catastrophe. The decisions these individuals made weren't driven by sadistic pleasure or personal gain, but by the terrifying conviction that failing to complete their ritual cycles would result in supernatural punishment that would destroy the entire world. The transformation required to maintain such beliefs while living among the very people they believed they were protecting demonstrates the incredible power of religious indoctrination to override basic human empathy. The journey into understanding how such extreme beliefs could develop and persist across generations led investigators to excavate additional sites connected to the Rodriguez family's history. What they discovered challenged every assumption about when these activities had begun and revealed a pattern of intergenerational participation that stretched back to the 1950s. The revelations about Roberto's father's involvement transformed the investigation from examining one man's crimes to uncovering a family legacy of ritualistic murder that had been carefully passed down through bloodlines like a sacred inheritance. The evidence emerging from these historical sites painted a disturbing picture of how each generation had refined and expanded upon their predecessor's work. Roberto's father had established the foundational practices. Roberto had systematized and expanded them, and Miguel's generation had adapted them for modern times while maintaining the core theological framework. The impact of discovering this 3-generational involvement was staggering, because it demonstrated how effectively such belief systems could be transmitted through family structures, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of indoctrination and violence. What strikes me most about this generational transmission is how it reveals the power of childhood conditioning to shape adult behavior. Each new generation grew up believing that their family's activities were not only normal, but necessary for humanity's survival. The mindset required to raise children within such a framework, to normalize ritualistic murder as a family obligation, speaks to the terrifying capacity humans have for rationalizing evil when it's wrapped in religious language and presented as cosmic necessity. The hidden truth about their historical activities became clear through documentation found at each site, detailed records showing how the practices had evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated and systematic with each passing generation. Behind the scenes of this evolution lay a careful process of learning from mistakes, adapting to changing social conditions, and refining their methods to avoid detection while maintaining their theological commitments. The revelations about this family legacy forced investigators to confront uncomfortable questions about how such beliefs could persist and thrive in modern America. The transformation from viewing the Rodriguez family as isolated extremists to recognizing them as part of a larger network of multi-generational believers required a complete reimagining of how religious extremism could operate in contemporary society. The transformation from investigating isolated incidents to mapping a systematic network of ritual sites across 4 states challenged everything investigators thought they knew about the scope of this organization. When ground-penetrating radar and archaeological surveys revealed 12 distinct burial locations stretching across the American Southwest, each marked with similar symbolic patterns, the true impact of this multi-generational network became undeniably clear. The mindset required to coordinate such a vast operation across such distances speaks to a level of organization that rivals any criminal enterprise in modern American history. Behind the scenes of this geographic expansion, Investigators discovered that the symbolic patterns weren't random but followed a specific template that had been carefully standardized across all locations. The hidden truth about these sites revealed that they weren't just burial grounds but formed part of a larger ritual framework, each location serving a specific purpose within the network's theological structure. The decisions required to establish and maintain such a dispersed system demonstrate the incredible commitment these individuals had to their twisted beliefs and their ability to think in terms of decades rather than years. The journey toward understanding the true scope of victimization took a devastating turn when investigators began cross-referencing missing persons reports from the past 7 decades with the locations of known cult properties. The revelations that emerged from this database analysis were staggering. Dozens of potential victims spanning multiple generations, all following a consistent pattern of rural child disappearances that had been overlooked because they occurred across different jurisdictions and time periods. What strikes me most about this pattern analysis is how it demonstrates the power of geographic distribution to hide systematic crimes. The transformation from viewing these as isolated tragedies to recognizing them as coordinated activities required investigators to think beyond traditional jurisdictional boundaries and consider how predators could exploit the gaps between different law enforcement agencies. The impact of discovering this pattern was profound, because it revealed that many families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their missing children were actually victims of the same organized network. The hidden truth about these disappearances became clear through the meticulous record-keeping discovered at various cult sites. Behind the scenes of their religious justifications, the network had maintained detailed documentation of their activities, tracking victims by location, date, and ritual significance. The mindset required to approach child murder with such systematic precision reveals the terrifying efficiency that extreme religious beliefs can inspire when they're combined with organizational skills and multi-generational planning. The journey into understanding this victimization pattern revealed something deeply disturbing about how such networks could operate undetected for so long. The decisions to target rural communities weren't random, but reflected a calculated understanding of how isolated families with missing children would be less likely to generate the kind of media attention and investigative resources that urban cases typically receive. The transformation of the American Southwest into a hunting ground for this network required a level of geographic knowledge and logistical coordination that suggests years of careful planning and reconnaissance. The impact of mapping these connections extended far beyond just solving historical cases because it provided investigators with a predictive framework for understanding where the network might strike next. The revelations about their site selection criteria, always rural, always isolated, always in communities where outsiders would be noticed but where missing children might not generate sustained investigation, created a profile that could be used to identify potential future targets. The transformation from investigating historical crimes to confronting an active threat occurred when Patricia's team discovered that the network's activities weren't just random acts of violence, but were building toward a specific numerical goal. Analysis of the cult's most sacred documents revealed their belief that 12 completed circles would fulfill their religious obligations and permanently protect humanity from the supernatural catastrophe they feared. The impact of this revelation was staggering because it meant that every site discovered wasn't just evidence of past crimes, but markers counting down to what they believed would be their ultimate mission. Behind the scenes of this countdown theory lay a sophisticated theological framework that treated each ritual location as a component in a larger protective system. The mindset required to plan such an extensive operation across multiple decades reveals how deeply these individuals believed in their cosmic responsibility. The hidden truth about their activities became clear. They weren't just killing children randomly, but were methodically working toward completing what they saw as humanity's spiritual protection system, with each victim serving as a crucial element in their grand design. The journey toward understanding this numerical significance took on urgent importance when investigators realized that 11 of the 12 required sites had already been completed. The decisions these individuals had made over 7 decades weren't driven by immediate gratification, but by patient commitment to a long-term goal that was now approaching completion. The transformation from viewing this as historical investigation to recognizing it as an active threat required law enforcement to completely shift their approach and timeline. The revelations about current activity emerged when Patricia's team began investigating recent disappearances in Louisiana and Oklahoma that showed disturbing similarities to the historical pattern. These weren't copycat crimes or unrelated incidents, but appeared to be connected to the same network, suggesting that surviving members were actively attempting to complete their final ritual cycle in 2024. The impact of discovering this contemporary activity was profound, because it meant that somewhere, children were potentially being held and prepared for the completion of what the cult saw as their 70-year mission. What strikes me most about this countdown mentality is how it demonstrates the power of long-term religious commitment to sustain criminal activity across multiple generations. The transformation required to maintain such focus over decades, passing the mission from parents to children and ensuring continuity despite law enforcement pressure, reveals the incredible organizational capabilities that extreme belief systems can inspire when they're combined with multi-generational planning. The hidden truth about these recent disappearances became clear when investigators cross-referenced the victims' profiles with the network's historical selection criteria. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be random child abductions lay the same methodical approach that had characterized the network's activities for decades, targeting isolated rural families, selecting children within specific age ranges, and operating in areas where missing persons cases might not generate sustained investigation. The journey into understanding the urgency of this situation revealed that the network wasn't just attempting to complete their final circle, but believed they were racing against a predetermined timeline that would determine humanity's fate. The decisions current members were making weren't just about fulfilling family obligations, but reflected their genuine conviction that failing to complete the 12th circle would result in cosmic catastrophe. The transformation from theoretical threat to imminent danger crystallized when Patricia's team traced recent communications intercepts to an abandoned Catholic orphanage in rural Louisiana, a facility that had been shuttered for decades but was now serving as the staging ground for what the cult believed would be their most important ritual. The impact of discovering this location was electric because it represented not just another crime scene but the culmination of a 70-year mission that surviving network members were preparing to complete within days. Behind the scenes of this final preparation, investigators realized they were dealing with individuals who had spent months carefully orchestrating what they saw as humanity's ultimate protection ritual. The mindset required to transform an abandoned religious facility into a ritualistic preparation site reveals how deeply these surviving members believed in their cosmic responsibility. The hidden truth about their choice of location became clear. They weren't just seeking isolation, but were deliberately using a place that had once been dedicated to protecting children, perverting its original purpose into something unthinkably dark. The journey toward understanding the urgency of this situation reached its critical moment when surveillance teams confirmed that 4 children were being held inside the facility, all showing signs of the same ritualistic preparation that had characterized the network's historical activities. The decisions facing law enforcement at this moment required balancing the need for careful planning with the knowledge that every passing hour brought these children closer to becoming the final victims in a 7-decade campaign of systematic murder. The revelations about the scope of their final operation emerged when investigators realized this wasn't just about completing one ritual site, but involved coordinated activities across 3 states simultaneously. The transformation from investigating historical crimes to orchestrating a multi-state rescue operation required unprecedented coordination between federal agencies, SWAT teams, and local law enforcement, all working against a timeline determined not by criminal convenience but by religious conviction. What strikes me most about this rescue operation is how it demonstrates the incredible complexity involved in stopping a network that had perfected their methods over multiple generations. The impact of coordinating simultaneous raids across such vast distances while maintaining operational security reveals the extraordinary commitment law enforcement was willing to make to prevent what they knew would be the culmination of decades of carefully planned horror. The hidden truth about the cult's final preparations became clear during the raids when investigators discovered that the network had spared no effort in creating what they believed would be the perfect conclusion to their mission. Behind the scenes of their theological justifications lay meticulous planning that included backup locations, escape routes, and contingency plans that demonstrated their understanding that this final ritual would likely expose them to unprecedented law enforcement attention. The journey into this final confrontation revealed something profound about the intersection of extreme belief and desperate determination. The decisions these surviving members were making weren't driven by self-preservation, but by their absolute conviction that completing this final circle was more important than their own lives or freedom. The transformation required to maintain such commitment while surrounded by evidence of law enforcement closing in speaks to the terrifying power of religious extremism to override basic survival instincts. The rescue operations themselves represented a triumph of modern investigative techniques over a network that had operated successfully for generations by exploiting the gaps between jurisdictions and the limitations of historical technology. The impact of successfully saving these 4 children couldn't be measured just in lives preserved, but in breaking a cycle that had claimed dozens of victims across 7 decades. The transformation from multi-state rescue operation to final confrontation reached its climax when tracking teams located Miguel Rodriguez in a remote cave system deep in the Dune, Louisiana bayou, where he had retreated with the one child who hadn't been recovered during the orphanage raids. The impact of discovering this location was profound because it represented the culmination of everything the network had worked toward for 7 decades. Their sacred final ritual site, carefully chosen and prepared for what Miguel believed would be humanity's ultimate protection ceremony. Behind the scenes of this final confrontation lay a man whose entire worldview was crumbling around him as law enforcement closed in, yet who remained absolutely committed to completing what he saw as his cosmic responsibility. The mindset required to maintain such dedication while surrounded by evidence that his network had been completely exposed reveals the terrifying power of lifelong indoctrination to override rational self-preservation. The hidden truth about Miguel's psychological state became clear during the standoff. He wasn't just trying to escape justice, but was genuinely convinced that failing to complete this final ritual would doom all of humanity. The journey into this cave system revealed the extent to which Miguel had prepared for this moment, transforming a natural formation into what he believed was the perfect conclusion to his family's sacred mission. The decisions he had made in selecting and preparing this location demonstrated the same methodical approach that had characterized the network's activities for generations, but now applied with the desperate urgency of someone who knew this would be his only opportunity to fulfill what he saw as his destiny. The revelations about Miguel's final preparations were both chilling and pathetic. A man who had spent his entire life believing in a cosmic mission that required the systematic murder of children, now facing the reality that his beliefs had been built on nothing more than generational trauma and carefully constructed delusions. The transformation from viewing him as a dangerous criminal to understanding him as the tragic product of decades of psychological manipulation required investigators to confront the complex nature of victimhood and perpetration within such networks. What strikes me most about this final confrontation is how it demonstrated the intersection of absolute belief and complete defeat. The impact of Miguel's capture wasn't just about preventing one more murder, but about breaking a cycle that had persisted for 70 years, passed down through 3 generations of carefully indoctrinated believers who had never questioned the fundamental premises of their mission. The hidden truth about the network's vulnerability became clear. Their entire system depended on the unshakable faith of its members, and once that faith was challenged by reality, the organization crumbled completely. The journey toward understanding the significance of this moment revealed that Miguel's arrest represented more than just law enforcement success. It was the definitive end of a belief system that had motivated some of the most systematic child murders in American history. Behind the scenes of his capture lay the recognition that without Miguel to complete what the network saw as their ultimate obligation, their entire theological framework collapsed, leaving surviving members without the religious justification that had sustained their activities for decades. The transformation from active threat to historical case study occurred in the moment. Miguel was taken into custody because his capture prevented the completion of what the cult believed was necessary to maintain cosmic order. The impact of this interruption wasn't just about saving one child's life, but about proving to any remaining believers that their supernatural fears were unfounded, that the world would continue to exist without their ritualistic protection. The transformation from rescue to recovery began when the 4 children saved from the Louisiana facility started, providing testimony that would forever change how investigators understood the psychological methods this network had perfected over decades. The impact of hearing these young voices describe being told they were chosen for a sacred purpose revealed the sophisticated manipulation techniques that had allowed the cult to maintain control over their victims even in the face of obvious terror and confusion. Behind the scenes of these testimonies lay a chilling picture of how the network had refined their psychological approach through generations of practice. The children described elaborate ceremonies designed to make them feel special and important, ritualistic preparations that gradually normalized increasingly disturbing behavior, and constant reinforcement that their participation was crucial for protecting their families and the world itself. The mindset required to develop such systematic psychological manipulation reveals how the cult had evolved from simple violence to something far more sophisticated and psychologically devastating. The journey into understanding these manipulation techniques became even more disturbing when the children described how their captors had used religious language and ceremonial elements to reframe their victimization as voluntary participation in something holy. The decisions the cult members had made to present murder as salvation, terror as honor, and victimization as divine selection demonstrates the incredible human capacity for transforming evil into something that appears virtuous through careful psychological conditioning. The hidden truth about the network's complete structure finally emerged when Miguel Rodriguez's psychological defenses collapsed during interrogation, leading to what investigators would later describe as the most comprehensive confession in the history of organized crime investigation. The revelations that poured from Miguel during hours of detailed testimony provided law enforcement with names, locations, methods, and historical details that enabled them to map the entire network with unprecedented precision. What strikes me most about Miguel's confession is how it demonstrated the power of isolation and capture to break even the most deeply held beliefs. The transformation from absolute certainty about his cosmic mission to complete psychological breakdown revealed that beneath all the religious justification and family tradition lay a man who had never been allowed to develop his own moral framework. The impact of confronting the reality that his entire worldview was built on delusion created a mental collapse that made him eager to reveal everything he knew about the organization that had shaped his entire existence. The journey through Miguel's testimony revealed not just historical information but real-time intelligence about remaining network members who might still be active in various locations across the Southwest. Behind the scenes of his confession, federal agents were already coordinating raids and arrests based on his detailed descriptions of safe houses, communication methods, and individuals who had participated in recent activities. The decisions Miguel made to provide such comprehensive information weren't just about seeking leniency but reflected his complete loss of faith in the belief system that had governed his life for 5 decades. The revelations about the network's communication structure, recruitment methods, and operational security proved invaluable for law enforcement efforts to ensure that no remaining cells could reconstitute the organization. The hidden truth about their vulnerabilities became clear through Miguel's detailed explanations of how the network had maintained security for so long and what weaknesses could be exploited to prevent any future resurrection of their activities. The transformation from a contained investigation to a nationwide operation unfolded with stunning speed as Miguel's detailed confessions provided law enforcement with a roadmap to every remaining participant in the network's decades-long conspiracy. Within 48 hours of his breakdown, coordinated arrests were taking place across 4 states, targeting not just active participants but elderly enablers who had spent their entire adult lives maintaining the cult's secrecy through a complex web of silence, misdirection, and community manipulation. Behind the scenes of these arrests, investigators discovered that the network's survival had depended as much on passive participants as active believers. The impact of understanding this broader complicity was profound, because it revealed how ordinary people could become essential components of extraordinary evil simply by choosing not to ask questions, not to report suspicious activities, and not to challenge family traditions that they knew in their hearts were wrong. The mindset required to maintain such willful ignorance for decades demonstrates the incredible human capacity for compartmentalization when confronting uncomfortable truths. The journey toward completing this investigation took an unexpected turn when one of the arrested enablers, facing the prospect of spending her remaining years in federal prison, revealed the location of what she called the source book, the original manual that had guided the cult's practices since its inception in the 1950s. The revelations about this document's existence transformed the investigation, yet again because it suggested that the network's activities weren't improvised family traditions but systematic practices based on written instructions that had been carefully preserved and transmitted across generations. The hidden truth about the cult's organizational sophistication became fully apparent when investigators discovered this handwritten manual hidden in the ruins of an old chapel that had been abandoned since the 1960s. The decisions required to preserve such a document for over 70 years, to protect it from discovery while ensuring its availability to new generations of believers, speaks to the incredible long-term planning and dedication that had characterized every aspect of the network's operations. What strikes me most about this source document is how it reveals the transformation of isolated criminal impulses into systematic religious doctrine. The impact of reading the original instructions was devastating for investigators because it proved that every horror they had uncovered, the ritualistic preparations, the symbolic arrangements, the psychological manipulation of victims, had been carefully planned and documented from the very beginning. The journey into understanding these written instructions revealed that what they had initially believed was organic family dysfunction was actually the methodical implementation of a comprehensive manual for systematic child murder. Behind the scenes of this discovery lay evidence that the manual had been updated and refined over the decades, with later generations adding their own improvements and adaptations while maintaining the core theological framework. The revelations about how this document had been used as both instruction manual and sacred text demonstrated the powerful role that written doctrine can play in legitimizing and perpetuating criminal behavior across multiple generations. The transformation from viewing the cult as a chaotic family conspiracy to recognizing it as a sophisticated organization with standardized practices and documented procedures required investigators to completely reimagine the scope of what they had been dealing with. The mindset revealed through these written instructions showed that the network's founders had always intended their activities to outlast their own lives, creating a system that could be transmitted to future generations with the precision of any other institutional knowledge. The transformation from examining individual crimes to understanding historical patterns led academic researchers to trace the cult's evolution from its origins in 1950s religious extremism to its eventual development into one of America's most systematic child murder networks. The impact of this historical research was profound because it revealed how fringe religious beliefs could gradually evolve into something unrecognizably evil through decades of isolation, generational transmission, and the slow erosion of moral boundaries that occurs when extreme ideas go unchallenged within closed communities. Behind the scenes of this academic investigation, lay a disturbing picture of how post-war America's religious revival movements had created fertile ground for extremist interpretations of Scripture and cosmic responsibility. The journey into understanding the cult's theological development revealed that what began as eccentric but relatively harmless beliefs about spiritual protection had gradually transformed into justifications for systematic murder through a process of doctrinal drift that occurred over multiple generations without outside scrutiny or challenge. The revelations about this historical evolution demonstrated how the decisions made by the cult's founding generation had created a trajectory that made increasingly extreme behavior seem logical and necessary to their descendants. The mindset required to maintain such beliefs across decades reveals how powerful isolation and family indoctrination can be in preserving and amplifying dangerous ideologies that would be immediately recognized as aberrant in mainstream society. The hidden truth about the cult's community impact became devastatingly clear as the full scope of their activities was revealed to the rural towns where they had operated for decades. The transformation experienced by these communities was perhaps the most psychologically complex aspect of the entire case, because it forced ordinary residents to confront their own complicity in enabling crimes that had been happening literally in their backyards for generations. What strikes me most about this community devastation is how it revealed the power of willful ignorance and social conformity to enable systematic evil. Behind the scenes of these rural communities lay decades of subtle signs that had been ignored, uncomfortable questions that had been avoided, and family secrets that had been protected through collective silence. The impact of finally confronting these truths forced entire towns to examine their own decisions about what they had chosen to see and what they had chosen to ignore. The journey toward understanding how such extensive criminal activity could remain secret for so long revealed the sophisticated ways in which the cult had exploited rural community dynamics, using local loyalties, family connections, and social hierarchies to create protective networks of silence. The revelations about this community complicity were particularly devastating because they showed how ordinary people could become essential enablers of extraordinary horror simply by prioritizing social harmony over moral responsibility. The transformation required for these communities to process their role in enabling the cult's activities was profound because it challenged fundamental assumptions about small-town values and community solidarity. The mindset shift from viewing their communities as safe havens to recognizing them as locations where systematic child murder had been protected and facilitated for decades required a complete reimagining of their own identity and moral foundation. The transformation from investigation to prosecution marked the beginning of what legal experts would later describe as one of the most complex federal cases in modern American criminal history. The impact of bringing surviving cult members to trial wasn't just about seeking justice for individual crimes, but about prosecuting a conspiracy that had spanned multiple decades, involved dozens of participants, and crossed state lines in ways that challenged traditional legal frameworks for handling organized criminal activity with religious components. Behind the scenes of these legal proceedings lay prosecutors who faced the unprecedented challenge of presenting evidence that seemed to defy belief while maintaining the judicial objectivity required for fair trials. The journey toward securing convictions required them to help juries understand how ordinary-appearing individuals could participate in systematic ritual murder without losing their humanity to the point where legal responsibility became questionable. The mindset required to prosecute such cases reveals the incredible complexity of balancing justice with the recognition that many defendants had themselves been victims of generational indoctrination. The revelations emerging from testimony during these trials provided the public with the most comprehensive understanding of how the network had operated, but also forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about the intersection of religious freedom and criminal behavior. The decisions facing judges and juries weren't just about determining guilt or innocence, but about establishing precedents for how the legal system should handle cases where extreme religious beliefs had motivated systematic criminal activity over multiple generations. The hidden truth about the legal challenges became clear as prosecutors struggled to convey the scope of the conspiracy while maintaining focus on individual accountability. What strikes me most about these proceedings is how they demonstrated the transformation required within the justice system itself to handle crimes that existed at the intersection of family dysfunction, religious extremism, and organized criminal activity in ways that traditional legal categories couldn't easily accommodate. The journey toward healing for the affected communities began with a decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier, transforming the Rodriguez property from a site of systematic horror into a memorial park dedicated to honoring the victims of the cult's crimes. The impact of this transformation represented more than just community healing. It symbolized the power of collective decision-making to reclaim spaces that had been corrupted by evil and redirect their purpose toward remembrance and prevention. Behind the scenes of creating this memorial lay intense community discussions about how to balance the need for remembrance with the desire to move forward from trauma. The revelations about community involvement in the planning process showed how the act of collectively deciding to honor victims, rather than hide from the past, became an essential part of processing the psychological impact of discovering that their neighborhoods had harbored such systematic evil for decades. The transformation of this physical space from burial ground to memorial required both practical considerations about how to respectfully handle the site while creating something meaningful for future generations. The mindset shift involved in viewing the property not as cursed ground, but as sacred space dedicated to ensuring that the victim's suffering would never be forgotten, represents a profound example of how communities can reclaim agency after experiencing systematic betrayal of trust. The transformation from active crisis to ongoing investigation marked a sobering reality that Detective Sarah Chen and her team would face for years to come. The recognition that while they had successfully dismantled the network and prevented its completion, the full scope of the cult's historical activities might never be completely understood. The impact of this realization was profound, because it meant that somewhere in the vast expanse of the American Southwest, there could still be unmarked burial sites containing victims whose families had never received answers about their disappearance. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a concluded case lay the painstaking work of cross-referencing decades of missing persons reports with the geographic patterns established by known cult sites. The journey toward identifying every possible victim required investigators to think beyond the confirmed locations and consider whether the network might have operated temporary sites or used locations that weren't documented in their recovered materials. The mindset required to maintain such thoroughness while knowing that some answers might never emerge demonstrates the incredible commitment law enforcement maintains to providing closure for grieving families. The revelations about this ongoing work showed how modern investigative techniques could be applied to historical crimes in ways that weren't possible when many of these disappearances first occurred. The decisions facing investigators weren't just about solving individual cases, but about ensuring that no remaining cult members could resurface and attempt to reconstitute the organization under different circumstances or in different locations. What strikes me most about this continuing investigation is how it reveals the long-term impact that such cases have on the law enforcement professionals who dedicate their careers to seeking justice for the most vulnerable victims. The hidden truth about Detective Chen's experience throughout this case was that solving it brought both profound satisfaction and lasting psychological burden. The satisfaction of preventing additional murders combined with the weight of understanding exactly what dozens of innocent children had endured. The journey toward what investigators hoped would be final resolution required them to balance the desire for complete answers with the recognition that some mysteries might remain forever unsolved. Behind the scenes of closing this case lay the complex emotions of professionals who had spent months immersed in evidence of systematic child murder, who had rescued living victims while discovering the remains of those who couldn't be saved, and who now faced the challenge of returning to normal investigative work after confronting the darkest extremes of human behavior. The transformation in Detective Chen's perspective from the beginning of this investigation to its conclusion reflects the profound impact that such cases have on everyone involved. The mindset, shift from believing that justice could somehow balance the scales of such extensive suffering to accepting that some tragedies are so vast that the best possible outcome is simply preventing them from continuing, demonstrates the complex relationship between professional duty and personal healing that characterizes careers dedicated to protecting society's most vulnerable members. The impact of preventing the cult's final ritual and dismantling their network represented a victory that would be measured not just in lives saved, but in a cycle of generational trauma that had finally been broken. The revelations about what had been prevented, the completion of a 70-year mission that had claimed dozens of lives, provided a framework for understanding the true significance of what had been accomplished, even while acknowledging that no amount of justice could restore what had been lost. The conclusion of this investigation represents something far more significant than just solving a complex criminal case. It demonstrates how persistence, modern investigative techniques, and interagency cooperation can bring justice even to crimes that seem designed to remain hidden forever. Detective Sarah Chen's journey from that first call about human remains in a water system to dismantling a 70-year network of systematic murder shows us that no matter how carefully evil tries to conceal itself, the truth has a way of surfacing when dedicated people refuse to give up on finding answers. What started with Marcus Rivera's routine plumbing repair became a testament to how ordinary moments can reveal extraordinary secrets, and how the seemingly impossible task of solving decades-old crimes becomes possible when investigators approach cold cases with fresh perspectives and advanced technology. The transformation these communities experienced, from unknowing complicity to active healing, reminds us that recovery from such profound betrayal is possible, even when the scars run generations deep. If you've stayed with me through this entire investigation, you understand something that not everyone grasps, that true crime isn't just about the sensational aspects of criminal behavior, but about the complex human stories behind both the crimes and their resolution. The content we explore here goes deeper than surface-level mystery because these stories reveal important truths about how societies function, how evil can hide in plain sight, and how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they choose to act on what they know is right. For those of you who made it all the way to this moment, write in the comments "Truth surfaces," because you understand that some stories need to be told completely, not just in sensational fragments, and that real understanding comes from following these investigations through to their conclusion. The connection we've built through sharing this story matters, and hitting that like button tells me you recognize the value in taking the time to truly understand these complex cases rather than just consuming quick summaries that miss the deeper psychological and social implications. There's a video right here that complements this topic perfectly. It explores another case where a seemingly impossible investigation revealed connections that changed everything investigators thought they knew about organized criminal networks. Click and continue with me over there, because once you understand how these patterns work, you'll start seeing them everywhere.